survey was applied to a total of 70 students. 62 who study BA programs in 2 dance schools that belong to the National Institute of Fine Arts, and 8 students from the BA in ethnomusicology from the music faculty at the National Autonomous University of Mexico. With regard to Laban notation or LOD training among the participants of this study, the information is this. 16 students had basic LOD training and 10 students had basic Laban notation training. The rest of the participants, including the control group, had no knowledge of either Laban notation or LOD. It's a bit small. In the survey, the students were asked to register the start of an action with a dot and to draw an arrow to indicate the duration of the movement. The arrows were to be drawn in the corresponding column, or in this case, row. The first step in processing the survey was to select which answers were valid and which were not. Our criteria for rejecting an answer were: the instructions were not followed, A and B. The action pattern was not clear. They made long arrows. The notation was left unfinished, E and F. There you can see some little dots, but no arrows. In the graph, the second step was to identify the valid answers, according to Fuggetti's 2012 typification of 5 graphical solutions. A is the real UT answer, B, C, and D are UT-like answers, and E is ST, specific timing. In the graph, you can see how similar the answers were. How similar the dancers' answers were. They had many invalid answers and very few specific timing answers, as opposed to the control group, who had no invalid answers and much more ST answers. We will go on to discuss the results. 1. In general terms, if the results of this study are compared to Fuggetti's results, we can say that they're very similar. Both indicate a high tendency to use UT. Of all the valid answers, Hungarian subjects registered a 99% of UT and Mexican subjects a 97%. On the other hand, ST represented only 1% of the Hungarian valid answers and 3% of the Mexican ones. 2. One of the differences between the Hungarian and the Mexican studies was that while in the first one all the subjects had Laban notation training, the Mexican study had 3 groups: subjects with no movement analysis training, subjects with basic LOD training, and subjects with basic Laban notation training. While the results are in no way final, we can say that A. The lowest percentage of invalid answers was given by 2 groups with no training, the musicians and the second-year Spanish dance group, and by the Mexican folk dance students with basic Laban notation training. The highest percentage of invalid answers was given by the remaining dance groups, those that had no movement analysis training and those with basic LOD training. In this particular context, we conclude that basic LOD training does not seem to promote the identification of the timing of actions, while basic Laban notation training seems to do so. This may be because LOD is taught as a means for exploring movement possibilities rather than for analyzing the timing of performance, and Laban notation is taught precisely with the purpose of identifying exactly when an action occurs in relation to the music. 3. Another of the differences between the Hungarian and the Mexican studies was that in the Mexican case, a control group was included. Even though Fuggetti's original study did not include such a group, he did apply a survey to musicians a few years later. However, because he designed a different survey and the Mexican study applied the same survey to both dancers and musicians, the results cannot be strictly compared. Nonetheless, it is interesting to note that in both cases, the musicians registered lower percentages of UT answers than the dancers, 90% of the Hungarian musicians and 87% for the Mexican ones. The control group's results show that they gave no invalid answers, their UT answers displayed the most diversity, and they had the most ST answers. If we take into account that the group with basic Laban notation training gave no ST answers, and that the dancers and musicians who had no movement analysis training were the ones who gave the most ST answers, then these results seem to suggest that Laban notation may lead to convergent thinking. Apparently, a familiarity with the concept of UT reduces divergent thinking and predisposes to respond in UT. This is a finding that also requires further investigation. Okay. 4. This study's findings seem to confirm Fuggetti's general idea that most people do tend to write movement in UT. However, despite the undeniable tendency to notate in UT, the question raised at the beginning of the study is still open. And despite Anne Hutchinson's 2009 general statement that says that UT may look simple and seem easy to read, we consider that, based on our experience as teachers, in the specific case of dance traditions that have complex movement and rhythmic patterns, UT may cause confusion in the students when translating the notation into actual movement. 5. With regard to verifying Fuggetti's hypothesis, we have to admit we noticed several issues which did not allow us to do so. A. Due to the way the survey was designed, it was difficult to tell whether it was the non-touching or the touching gestures which were being written in UT or ST. The reason for this was that the same marker, an arrow, was used in the same column, the leg gesture column or the arm column. So, if the hypothesis is to be verified, we suggest leaving the arrow for the non-touching gestures and adding a different marker for the contacts. B. Before applying the survey, we were aware that in Spanish and Mexican folk dance, the preparation of an action is not considered important. Due to the manner in which these dance traditions are taught, neither the actual movements that constitute the preparation nor the time spent performing these movements are explicitly emphasized. This had to be taken into account in the analysis of the results because being aware of the preparation of an action may influence the election of UT or ST when notating. Therefore, it is difficult to say in all certainty whether the students of this, whether the subjects of the study decided to use UT or ST because they consciously chose one over the other, or whether they responded automatically, given the general tendency to answer in UT. In our appreciation, the concept of movement rhythm as used by Fuggetti needs to be examined from two different angles. With regard to the factual or physical aspect, we venture to suggest that it is not clear whether it refers to the step pattern, the metrical rhythm, or the action rhythm. With regard to the internal or cognitive aspect, which Fugedi calls the inner representation of the movement rhythm, we also venture to suggest that it is not clear whether the term refers to the perceptual kinesthetic sensation produced when observing or performing the movement, to the psychophysiological process of embodying movement, or to the cognitive process of translating movement into verbal or visual language. We believe that Fugedi's concept of movement rhythm is essential and that it requires further systematic development. As a result of our teaching experience, we have noticed that once the students become aware of the preciseness involved in ST, they tend to use it when notating folk dance sequences. Therefore, we will devise a new survey to measure the students' choices after they have been working with ST and not just UT. We strongly recommend that further research is done in this subject. In the first place, because the study raised new questions. In the second place, by investigating how we perceive movement and how we translate it into concepts, verbal and visual, we will advance in the study of movement and dance in general. In the third place, by delving deeper into the analysis of the perception of the movement rhythm, we will be promoting alternative teaching methods, not just for the teaching of Laban-related forms of movement analysis, but for the improvement of the teaching-learning processes of different folk dance traditions. And finally, in terms of the preservation of the cultural heritage, a form of notation that represents accurately the factual elements of a folk dance will ensure that a later reconstruction will be as close as possible to the original version. We would like to thank János Fugedi for sharing with us his research materials, Fernando Aragon, Lidia Romero, and Gabriel Briones for their collaboration in the application of the survey, and to all the students who took part in it. And thank you.
Thank you.